It is my absolute pleasure to introduce these two first-time DEF CON speakers, Alejandro and Borja. The title of their talk is Kill Chain Reloaded, Abusing Legacy Paths for Stealth Persistence. With that, take it away, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you very much to the organizer for inviting us to DEF CON. It's an honor for us to be here. Our English is not perfect, but we will try to explain everything as clear as possible. We ask for your patience, and please do not be too hard with us. This is my colleague, Alejandro Hernando. We both work in the hacking department at Accenture Spain in Red Team and Research. We love breaking things and find vulnerabilities. Here are your social media, just in case you won't contact us or ask anything about this talk. I am Borja Martinez. I also work in the hacking department at Accenture Spain. Sometimes I participate in Capture the Flag competition as a member of the identity team. But now we are retired. Here are my social network for any question or doubt you may have after the presentation. Okay. In this part, we will focus on how we do threat hunting to find vulnerable artifacts, our methodology to look for these drivers, specific software and drivers we use in our research, vulnerabilities we found in UEFI software to develop advanced bootkits and new persistent techniques, finally, how we use these vulnerable drivers to get persistent in real red team exercises. Okay, before we go deeper, we're going to explain why I think this topic is especially important today. In recent years, we have seen that threats which look almost theoretical and new completely real. Bootkits like Black Lotus, for example, have managed to run malware on Windows 11 system with secure boot enabled. So systems with all security enabled can still be fully compromised. And we are not talking about all APTs from 10 years ago. That is the reality we find when researching low-level security. One common mistake is to think that if you have secure boot enabled, you are protected. But it isn't that simple. Secure boot works with a list of trusted binaries and another list called DBX for revoked binaries. If a vulnerable binary is in the DBX, secure boot will load it anyway, even if it's compromised. Also, many vendors don't update that list quickly. There are cases where it takes months to revoke binaries with critical vulnerabilities like Black Lotus. But not everything is caught by attackers. Sometimes they are failures from inside. In July 2024, a crash type update broke computers all over the world. The faulty agents caused massive abuse of this, especially in corporate environments as airports, banks, hospitals, all were affected. And this was without malware, without exploit, only a bad binary running a critical part of the system. We mention this because bootkits want the same level of control, but with a malicious and persistent goal. It's a good example of how one single binary can break everything. Here is a quick table with some of the most well-known bootkits used in real operations, many linked to APTs. Most of them load before the operating system, so no EDR, antivirus, or traditional solution can see them. They control the system from the moment you turn it on. Okay, we have been researching all this from an offensive perspective. We want persistent, we abuse vulnerable software, sign files, and trusting drivers, and chain everything to get stage execution and total control. We will show how we did threat hunting for signed artifacts that lets us do this in real scenarios. You will see how we use VirusTotal, RetroHunt, and the Microsoft Driver Catalog to find components with useful functions. Physical memory access, kernel rewrite, and so on. We will also explain how we exploit these pieces to inject code into UEFI, manipulate the boot process, and keep persistent without leaving traces. And the most important thing is how to use all this in real red team exercises without raising alerts. Okay, demo time. Okay, here you can see someone kindly lends us a VirusTotal enterprise account. In VirusTotal, we do two main things: search base things or use JARA rules with RetroHunt. For RetroHunt, as you can see, our script uses pinport to select interesting functions On the right, the load list you see are the load drivers we use as a blacklist to avoid drivers that's already revoked or known to be vulnerable. We do a quick demo run. As you can see, it finds many drivers with those functions very fast. Task is running, and before we had already launched 2 more. One with 4,000 result, and another with 10,000 result. On the other hand, we sometimes search for specific mistakes like WPBX, which Alejandro explained later. We add tags, for example, to only see same binaries. No tenemos agua ni nada. Another good search is by looking for certificates like Microsoft Windows UEFI driver, publisher, or Microsoft Corporation UEFI CA 2011. There are more options, but these are a few examples so you understand how we search for useful binaries. The demo is okay. Here, for example, you see SIM64 EFI and it's all the binary sign. Okay. Also, based on research from GitHub project, we made this script. The script sends queries to the Microsoft catalog like we have done before with RetroHunt, searching for drivers with interesting function. Now we run this script, it searches all the old pages, and when it finds a string like go away, spoiler, it downloads all the cat files, the match keyword we provided. So this is the first demo showing you how we found some drivers and EFI files, which we later use in our research. With the next demos, you will see more clearly how we use these files. ¿Cuál era la diapositiva? Okay. Before going to the technical part, let's get some context about what UEFI is, what a bootloader is, and why these are so important for our research. When we turn on a computer, the first thing that runs is not Windows, not the ADR, not the antivirus. The firmware runs first, UEFI. UEFI is like a mini operating system without memory, heap, services, and drivers. It has many phases, but the most interesting for us is DXE, where EFI modules are loaded. After initialization, UEFI runs the bootloader, which loads the system kernel. In Windows, it's usually booten GFWEFI or booten GREFI. In Linux, it can be grab, sim, or something custom. And here is the key point. Everything that's happened before exit boost services, it's outside the radar of almost security solutions. If we can put a signed EFI in loading path, we can intervene, redirect, persist, or exploit the boot before the OS can defend itself. And now, I give the floor to my colleague, Alejandro, who will explain this part in more detail.
Okay, just a second. All right. As we discussed before, you can't just run an EFI binary on the system. We must consider the security mechanisms that Windows implement to block the execution in the pre-boot environment. Secure Boot aims to block the execution of unauthorized code from running in the pre-boot environment. It does so by allowing only signed, trusted binaries to execute. However, there are a lot of vulnerable applications in the wild. For example, New Horizon dataset bootloaders. New Horizon dataset bootloaders before June 2022 were assigned. However, they were also vulnerable. They allow the loading of arbitrary unsigned EFI binaries. With arbitrary EFI execution, an attacker can bypass platform security, install persistent bootkits, perform pre-boot attacks, and fully control the system, including firmware settings and boot flow. So, on the other hand, Microsoft mitigates this class of secure boot bypasses, like the New Horizon dataset bootloaders, using the DBX. DBX is a UEFI secure boot revocation list, and it contains signatures of known binaries that are no longer trusted, even if they were originally signed. Even though the binary is signed, Secure Boot refuses to execute it if it matches any DVX entry. Microsoft distributes DVX through Windows updates, usually as part of regular security patches. However, in 2024, Microsoft published the Secure Boot object repository on GitHub to openly share the contents of the Secure Boot DVX list and related signature databases. This repository allows security researchers to inspect which UEFI bootloaders and certificates have been revoked by Secure Boot updates. So, using this resource, we downloaded a publicly available edition of Reboot Restore. We extracted their hashes, and we then compared those hashes against the entries in the DVX. We found that some versions of shield loader are correctly listed in the DVX, specifically those matching the hash outlined above. This hash corresponds to the entries of the CVE we talked about before. However, we also found several other versions of the bootloader. These had different hashes and were not present in the DVX. This suggests that additional vulnerable variant of shield loader may exist in the wild. This has not yet been added to Microsoft revocation list and may still be trusted by Secure Boot on systems that rely on DVX protection. So let's now take a closer look at how Reboot Restore actually works. Reboot Restore is a software that restores a computer to a preset state every time it restarts. Its main EFI binary is shield loader. Before we get into the loader internals, here's how shield loader gets into the chain. First, firmware looks for the ESP, the EFI system partition, for the bootloader or boot manager. Shield loader is renamed or copied over the bootloader, so when the firmware invokes bootloader, it actually runs shield loader first. Shield loader then implements its own logic, the compression, signature checks, and so on, before finally loading the real boot manager. Okay, but what does shield loader do? We divide the shield loader operation in 4 phases. First, shield loader opens the ESP FAT volume, locates the file shield manager _, notice underscore, this is important, allocate the file size, and reads all bytes into a buffer. If that works, we end up with the proprietary format binary, NAUI, in memory. If it fails, the loader fallbacks to scanning every installed firmware volume. We'll talk about this proprietary format later. Then, the loader invokes parse header. This routine first inspects the 200-byte header at the start. It reads the ASCII magic and extracts both the compressed and uncompressed file length. After that, it goes through the chunks. And for every chunk, it calls decompress on the payload. And if it isn't compressed, it simply main copy the raw data. And this is how the proprietary format looks like. This is the EF_ format. We have the 200-byte headers with magic, compressed and uncompressed file length. Then the chunks, marked as compressed or not. And finally, the trailer where the signature is located. Okay, after that, the shield loader looks for the signature of the trailer, the last 800 bytes. So after decompressing and allocating the image, the bootloader goes into phase 3. In this phase, the loader invokes check signature. Then it jumps to the last 800 bytes of the buffer where it expects the trailer. If the magic is wrong, the padding chain fails or something is not good, check signature returns false, and the loader aborts with EFI security violation. Finally, in phase 4, the loader hands off to the standard UEFI boot services. It calls load image and returns a new EFI handle. It then invokes a start image, which transfers control into the loaded P. And this is almost the full chain of shield loader. But we also found an interesting proprietary format EFI file. Remember that _ EFI files like this. Additionally, in one firmware version, we discover a container named shell.ef_. This is actually a signed UEFI shell binary with only a small subset of command enable. Although if functionality is limited, we can leverage it later as a convenient, trusted entry point into the UEFI environment. Right, but what does shell loader do? Remember that shield loader loads shield manager. So after decompressing the EFI in shield manager, the loader skips the custom format and directly load another EFI image. Any EFI executable placed at shield.efi at ESP will be loaded and run without checks. This means two things. First, there's no signature verification. Load unsigned EFI never calls check signature. Also, there is no container parsing. It expects an straight P image, so you can drop any EFI file there. You can write your own EFI binary and compile it and put it as shield.efi into the ESP partition, and shield manager will load it for you. So this is important, so we can abuse this to load our own unsigned EFI binary. So let's do this in a demo. Okay. Well, let's begin the demo. First, we verify that secure boot is enabled. If the PowerShell command returns true, it means secure boot is active and functioning properly. In this case, we can see that it's indeed enabled. Next, we run our EFI installer. This tool replaces the files in the ESP, EFI system partition, with our own. So what happens after the system reboot? Remember that we have replaced it, the original bootloader, with our installer. At this point, shield loader loads shield manager. Shield manager then loads shield.efi, which is our custom unsigned binary. This binary calls, really allocates another image, and then at this point, this binary displays this custom STR splash screen. And once the animation completes, we chain load the original boot manager and Windows boot successfully. Okay, just a second. Right. Okay. So, but what about BitLocker protection? When you enable BitLocker on an OJS volume, the VNK is sealed in the TPN against the current values of several PCRs. With secure boot enabled, usually PCR7 records a hash of every EFI executable that runs before the kernel. Boot manager, BCD, early drivers, and so on. If any one PCR is different after boot, the comparison, the unseal fails, and Windows falls back to BitLocker recovery mode. Okay, so what does our proof of concept do? First, we suspend BitLocker protection indefinitely. We achieve this by using WMI to run disable key protectors with disable count equal to 0. This prevents triggering BitLocker recovery after modifying EFI files in the ESP partition. Then, we mount the EFI system partition, backup original bootloaders, and save boot manager and boot64 for later restoration. Finally, we deploy the modified boot files. To do this, we override the bootloader with shield loader, and we continue by replacing the expected shield manager, the shield manager underscore, remember, with shell.ef underscore, which is the signed UEFI shell with a limited command set enabled. We also need to copy a stage0.efi, that is a signed tool capable of enrolling unsigned binaries into machine owner key. And last but not least, we copy loader.efi, that is our final unsigned payload, into ESP. Okay, that was a lot of things. Let's see it in action. Okay. Good. In this demo, we start by verifying that BitLocker protection is enabled. Using the manage BDE command, we confirm that BitLocker is indeed active. After that, we run our EFI installer and reboot the system. Okay, remember that secure boot is also enabled at this point. As part of the installer process, it replaces the files in the ESP, EFI system partition, and disable BitLocker protection using WMI. After reboot, instead of the usual boot flow, we load shell.ef underscore, notice underscore, which is the assigned proprietary version of the UEFI shell we talked about before, the UEFI shell with a limited command set enable. From this restricted UEFI shell, we then load a stage 0, a signed EFI binary designed to enroll any binary into the machine owner key. In this case, we enroll loader.EFI, which is actually a fully functional version of the UEFI shell. Now that we have a fully capable shell, let's attempt to load an unsigned EFI binary. As expected, this fails because secure boot is still enforced. To bypass this, we can do a lot of things, but we locate the UEFI protocol handles associated with the security architecture protocols. Once identified, we patch them with the opcodes XOR, RAX, and then return. In this example, to bypass secure boot protection, we first need to identify the addresses of the security architecture protocols handles, and once located, we modify the corresponding opcodes. For demonstration purposes, we are applying the patch byte by byte rather than using a more automated or optimized method. So we just show opcode left, okay, and then return. This should disable the secure boot validation mechanism. So now we need to try to run our EFI unsigned EFI binary again. And it works because we previously disabled BitLocker using WMI. We are able to chain load the original boot manager, allowing Windows to boot successfully without any BitLocker recovery screen or recovery function. All right? Thank you. Okay, let's continue. Well, but enough as the art. Let's do something more interesting, like achieving persistence. One technique we can try to abuse is WPBT, the Windows Platform Binary Table. WPBT lets the firmware place one native application at C Windows System 32 and execute it in the session manager context. This is important. In other research, this approach appears to work when the binary is signed with a null certificate. However, in our test on Windows 11 24.8.2, this doesn't work if the certificate is revoked. Since many of the leaked code signing certificates are now revoked, we need to find new ways to achieve our goals. So we can simply drop in a native application and run it. That's a problem because we need to modify it. But what if instead we find a signed native application that's vulnerable and exploit it to do whatever we want? And that's exactly what we've done. We found a signed application from Lenovo. This binary was used by Lenovo Service Engine, LSA, to smuggle a big blob of PE files, registry keys, and config data from firmware into Windows. It's used a proprietary ACP table called LUFT table that isn't part of the ACP specification. Only Lenovo's binary parses it. This lets an attacker to install an arbitrary driver or service completely from ACPI. So you are installing after the boot from the pre-boot environment, and this will be interesting. So no discrete needed until the session manager release. The session manager does it for you. So we need to construct a new LUFT table, a new Lenovo table that needs to drop health.sys. Health.sys is a known signed vulnerable driver we found over there. We use this to construct our LUFT table. Then we also need to fill our table to create a service key under, for example, toServer driver. It can be whatever name. We also need to set display name, image path, type, error control values. And after that, we reuse slot 6 in the STT. The slot 6 originally points to the SMT entry of the OMs. We need that slot points to the start of our buffer that we've full with our LUFT table. After that, we also need to fix the checksum. Okay, but what does the Lenovo native application do? Well, looks for custom ACP table named LUFT, writes the embedded binary to this, calling the function level as safe binary to C, Windows System 32, drivers, whatever .sys. Then it invokes create registry keys on every subdescriptor, which in turn writes or patches the registry, so the binary will launch automatically. Right? We also need to construct our WPBT table. We need to find a writable runtime space, or we can just allocate it because we have runtime execution, we have EFI execution. So we can allocate and copy our real payload, that is the Lenovo native sign application there. We also need to overwrite the first 16 byte in the SRAT with this WPBT header. This silently turns the SRAT into a WPBT and the system upset it. We also need to fix the checksum. So to summarize what we are going to do. Firmware first finish post enters exitboot services, and real-time memory still contains our injected blobs. Windows Loader scan the SDT, find our Lenovo proprietary table, proves the run page that used to be SRAT, but now begins with WPBT, sees a valid length and checksums, and asserts it as WPBT. After that, the session manager copies the Lenovo sign application from the WPBT to this and executes it as NT process startup. Then the Lenovo native sign app, started by run service 1, parses the lab, drop help.sys, write the registry values, and start the service, or schedule it for the next boot, depending on the flags. On the next boot, Windows sees a legitimate driver entry under services to service driver, loads help.sys, and the system is compromised. It's better to see it in action. Okay. Okay, just a second. Good. In this demo, we once again begin by verifying that secure boot is enabled. Okay, better right here. Okay. We also confirm that the target service does not exist on the system. We are going to do everything of this from the pre-boot environment. As usual, we run our EFI installer, and afterwards, we validate that neither the help.sys driver nor the Lenovo native application file is present. We then proceed to reboot the machine. Upon reboot, we chain load our custom EFI binary, which launches an unsigned UEFI shell for demonstration purposes. So wait a few seconds until the system reboot. Okay. So remember, we modified the EFI system partition to replace the bootloader with shield loader, then shield manager. Shield manager is loading our custom EFI file, and this custom EFI file right now is loading a fully functional UEFI shell. From this UEFI shell, then we need to patch the WPBT, the Windows Platform Binary Table, and create our custom LUFT table, the Lenovo native, well, the Lenovo custom table, ACP table. Okay, as the system boots, the session manager executed the Lenovo native application before prompting a user to log in. So here it is. Then the application reads the LUFT table, loads our signed vulnerable driver, help.sys, into memory, and writes this into disk. And after that, it configures the appropriate registry keys to register the service and ensure it starts automatically. Only 2 keys left. So type, and then error control values, or start values, error control, and then the system should start. Okay, we need to confirm, at first, we didn't have a help.sys driver, not the Lenovo native application on the system. We are trying to put those files from the pre-boot environment, and we need to check if, after boot, if those files exist. So once Windows finish booting, we need to confirm the presence of the help.sys driver and the WPBT, that is the renamed Lenovo native application. So first, we need to check if our help.sys driver is present on the system. And here it is, right? And we also need to confirm that the Lenovo native application is over there. And here it is. We also can check its signature to see if it belongs to Lenovo. And finally, the most important part is that we need to verify that our new service exists. And here it is. We have two service driver installed on the system. It's successfully loading a kernel driver, and on the next reboot, it will be launched automatically. So now we have a vulnerable driver installed from the pre-boot. Now Borja will show you some ways to exploit this.
Muy bien. Okay. Okay, in this last part of our presentation, we'll show you how we completed the full persistent chain from the system boot using legitimate signed but vulnerable drivers. The key event here, we found these vulnerabilities ourselves, and we are using the method that my colleagues have presented earlier to load this driver right from the system startup. This is essentially a big WOD, brain yarn vulnerable driver technique, but with full control. We analyze, choose, and exploit drivers that haven't previously been reported as vulnerable, yet provided direct kernel access. What does this achieve? Real persistence. From the moment the system boot until our payload runs without detection by security solutions. The flow like this. At the FA stage, we place a signed AFI file loaded before the operating system starts. From there, we automated the loading of one of these vulnerable drivers. Once the driver is loaded, we gain kernel full access using primitives. With kernel level access, we implant silent and persistent malware. We discovered this driver by analyzing numerous artifacts from the Microsoft catalog, using RetroHand in VirusTotal, and exploring other repositories, as we've mentioned earlier. Many of these drivers came of major vendor, yet they have no detection whatsoever. We identified vulnerabilities in OCTL handling, allowing user land control memory to invoke sensitive functions without validation and even modify critical system structures. With these vulnerabilities, we can bypass driver signature informant, EDRs, and other runtime protections, hook driver function by modifying the import address table from kernel mode, and register system callbacks to hide our activity and evade detection. The critical point, there is nothing malicious from the system's perspective. Everything is signed, legitimate, and yet completely vulnerable. This type of persistence is very hard to detect and even harder to remove. It plays in a real environment. It ensures total control after every reboot without touching disk or visible processes. This is a real and interesting case. A signed driver from Huawei, not originally intended for malicious use, but whose features are perfect for persistent and kernel-level protection. This driver installed with Huawei AI service just remains active even after you install the software. This persistent behavior is particularly useful from an offensive perspective. What this is actually to do? It registers callbacks for process creation and termination using PS set create process notifying routine, monitoring specific user-defined processes. But it goes so further. It also registers process access, filter via OB registered callbacks, intercepting calls like open process. If it detected dangerous permission like process terminate, it removes them on the fly, protecting the process from being killed or injected. Even if someone manages to terminate the protected process, the driver automatically restarts it. It achieves this by injecting an EPC into legitimate processes like Service X, quietly executing hidden command to restart the target service. The most serious issue isn't just the driver protect and restart processes from kernel mode, but that all this power is available from user land without requiring privileges, signature, or validation. The driver creates a device object accessible by any process. HWA gallery word driver controlling application can send command, it no admin right, signature authentication needed. Huawei even provides a tool, EagleCheckX, communicating with the driver via OCTL. Internally, this command triggers OCTL 0x222004, passing a Unicode string with the process path like C Windows System 32 Notepad X, instructing the driver to protect this process. Here, the vulnerability, the driver validating nothing. No check of command sender identity, no validation of the process start working or signature, no limit on which or how many processes can be protected. This means you can seal any process, including malware, protect your post-exploitation tools, prevent EDR or forensics tools from killing their processes. Moreover, if the process dies, the driver automatically restarted, effectively becoming a functional rootkit distribution by legitimate vendor control by sending simple string from userland. From an offensive viewpoint, it's perfect. Kernel-level persistence, real-time protection, userland control, zero validation or authentication. You don't even need to exploit it. The driver is inherently vulnerable. Once the driver receives a command from userland to protect a process, for example, see Windows 32 Notepad X, its internal validation is extremely weak. Instead of checking digital signature, hashing binaries, or validation executables, it's simple compare the command line as a plain text. It's called ps-get-process pip to access the target process's PEB and then uses key stack attached process to read its command line directly from memory. Then it compares this command line string with the one received via OCTL using RTL compared Unicode string. What's wrong here? Comparison is case sensitive, no path normalization, no handling of symbolic link, space, or path variants, only a text comparison, no binary signature, hash, or metadata verification. To use implications, you can easily bypass protection by slightly altering the path or casing. You can protect arbitrary processes, even malicious ones, fooling EDR. The design is fundamentally broken. A slight difference in case is enough to bypass or abuse the mechanism. For attackers, this is an opportunity. Protect malicious payloads as legitimate, evade detection by trivially bypassing validation, automatically seal anything you run without complex techniques. Okay, this part of the driver is extremely dangerous for persistence. Even if the Huawei software is uninstalled, the driver stays loaded in memory with kernel privileges. Remove it required manual intervention. Use commands like acstop, acdelete, or record remove. If someone killed the protected process, the driver automatically restarted it without the userland intervention. It uses APC injection. Construct command like start my service, find an active threat in a trusted process, usually service X, uses key insert Q APC to execute command silently. The process restarts silently, invisibly, and automatically kernel persists without touching the disk. This method evades most EDRs because process creation occurs from kernel space rather than userland by passing security hooks. For red teams, this means stealth persistence, invisible process creation, active defense against terminations. This driver behavior makes it essentially a primitive rootkit. It not only protects a process, but also completely disables normal OS monitoring and control mechanism. It removes process terminate right from kernel mode, blocking user-level tools from terminate protected processes. Everything occurs in kernel space, undetectable by userland tools like task managers, sysmons, EDRs, or antivirus solutions. Command and control action inject directly into legitimate process like services X, further handling activity. No signature validation, means malicious, or custom binaries are protected without detection. Offensive implications: persistent, unstoppable kernel-level code execution, real-time evasion of monitoring and hooks, no userland agents needed for protection. Okay, demo time. Okay, first, we've developed a proof of concept that deploys a malicious service called Hell. When we launch the POCs register and start the Hell service on the business system, the service directly interacts with the vulnerable Huawei driver that we have described earlier. Upon activation, the service establishes a reverser, granting us a remote control over the compromised endpoint. As a visual indicator, the service also found a prompt window displaying the message Hello DEFCON 33, confirming successful execution and persistent on the target machine. Next, we attempt to terminate the malicious process using Task Manager. However, when we to kill this process, the system immediately returns an access denied message. It's a direct result of the kernel-level protection implemented through the vulnerable driver. The driver strips away the privileges required to terminate the process, effectively hardening the malicious service against any action from EDR tools or local administrative attempts. The system is protected by an EDR solutions, fully operational and configuring with all protection at the highest enforcement level phase 3, remote payload execution and active protection against termination. The EDR doesn't generate any alert or suspicious events. The second part of the demo, we presented a variant leveraging another vulnerable Huawei driver discovered our research. In this case, our goal is different: to bypass protective process light, PPL, and stealthy terminated protective processes such as antivirus or EDR actions. To achieve this, we exploit the functionality exposed the vulnerable driver, specifically an HTTL interface that allows us to invoke the SATW terminate process function directly from the kernel mode. Using this technique, the driver can terminate highly privileged process, including antivirus and EDR, without restriction and without generating any alerts in the console or the EDR event logs. As a proof of concept, we've created an executable that interacts with the health service and also leverages the vulnerable function to kill the antivirus on an EDR process, as can be seen in Task Manager. As we mentioned before, this is just a POC, but the entire process could be made significantly stealthier and more sophisticated for a real-world red team operation. Okay. Thank you. Okay. To sum up the talk, let's quickly go over the key points. Secure boot improves security, but it has clear limitation. We've found what legitimate signed binaries can still be abused, especially when the DBX revocation list isn't properly updated. EUFI remains a critical and often overlooked attack surface. It allows code execution very early in the boot process, far before traditional security tools can react, providing a perfect window for persistence. The Bring Your vulnerable driver lets us abuse legitimate driver to gain direct kernel access. We demonstrated has poorly implemented OCTL-enabled privilege escalation and the ability to disable protections. Every component we use is legitimate, signed, and allowed silently. We didn't need any traditional malware, just public, trusted tool that we've repurposed offensively. This clearly shows that the most effective offensive techniques don't rely on obvious malware. With the right vulnerabilities and smart use of legitimate components, it's possible to fully compromise the system silently and persistently. If you are interested in digging deeper, here are the references we use for our research. Don't worry about copying them now. The slides we uploaded after the talk, so you can check everything later. Okay. Thank you all for your time and attention. The GitHub repository is now available. We hope you enjoyed the talk and maybe learned something today. Also, thank you to our friend who has supported us during the project. Thank you so much.